what they probably didn't want us to talk about. We're going to start though with something that's a little, I guess, a lot more innocent, if you want to put it that way. Although some people might think it's the worst thing. But I need a helper for this. Crown Hill is laid out into what we call sections. This happens to be section 13, I think. This area is surrounded by all the roads. Then each section is laid out into individual lots. We have maps that indicate, records where everybody's buried. So even those thousands of people that don't have headstones for one reason or another, we know exactly where they're buried. Everybody here has a unique address. We do have on our website something called Burial Locator, except we're switching servers, and so it's not working right now. But at some point in the future, you can go online to our Burial Locator and type in a name. It will tell you, like, my name's Tom Davis. There are already 8 Tom Davises buried here. It will give you their section and lot number. We're standing, right behind us here is where 2 families, the McCullough family and the Reynolds family, went together. This is a copy of a page from our records with a map of their lot. And I need a helper. He looks like the youngest person, so we'll let him be our helper if he doesn't mind. He's going to have to yell out real loud. I want him to tell us, and not just the names, but this description of who's buried in section 13, lot 50, grave number 7, which is right over here. It's not marked though. Can you scream it out?
Don and the 2 dogs.
Okay. Right here, next to the President of the United States, by the way, we do have in our records, I think the only ones in our records, 2 dogs buried. One belonged to Dr. McCullough and one belonged to Dr. Samuel Reynolds. Don and Rav were their names. Reynolds was on our board of directors back in the early 1900s, and if you're on the board of directors, you can cheat, do things that you're not supposed to do, and burying animals at Crown Hill Cemetery is against the rules. So they're the only ones that got into the records. I don't know if there are any other animals buried here or not. We're going to presume that there are not. I do know those people that have scattered the ashes of their pets here, so I'll give you some ideas. But we're going to, I guess, start talking about the meat of the tour. We'll just walk down to this mausoleum here. And if you guys have questions as we walk along, feel free to yell them out. I think because I have this microphone, I can answer questions while we walk along. Here we have evidence that we're still a very active cemetery.
Well, right at our house, isn't it really? So I poured down a little bit here.
Okay, this is the mausoleum for Carl Fisher, who on one of our regular tours I would go into more detail about him, probably being even more so than President Harrison, who's buried right over there. We're going to end up with a story about President Harrison at the end of the tour. But Carl Fisher is probably, in American culture, the most important person buried at Crown Hill Cemetery, although most of us don't know that. How many of you drove here tonight? Or came in a car? All of you, huh? Well, he had the first automobile dealership, not just here in town, but almost in the United States. To sell cars, he knew, well, he had to do some things. One was to promote them. We'll go into some of that. He also had to make people would buy more cars and to run for better. He was an instrumental force behind both the first national highway that went from the East Coast to the West Coast, called the Lincoln Highway, the first highway that went from north to south, Chicago to Miami, and I'll go into why he did that. And he locked into the rights to the first headlights, lots of things like that. So the fact that you guys all drove here tonight, how many vacationed in Florida? Okay, well, we'll get to why that's important and Carl's influence in that. But to promote cars, his early dealership, well, first he had bicycles. like a lot of the guys that got involved in cars, about 10 years before they got cars, they had the bicycles. And to promote bicycles, sometimes he would advertise in the paper that, hey, I'm going to throw a bicycle off the roof of the Merchants Bank building tomorrow at noon. Whoever first brings it back to my shop will get a free bicycle. The one that's been thrown off the roof. But when he got to cars, he would hire a hot air balloon that would pick up him in his Stoddard Dayton, one that had the engine removed, but you weren't supposed to know that. And then he'd fly across Indianapolis on, at the wheel of his Stoddard Dayton car. And when it landed, his brother who had followed him in another Stoddard Dayton would, they'd get in that car and drive it back to town. Well, they were doing that in October 30th of 1908, so almost 100 years ago. Carl was about 35 when 15-year-old Jane Watt was standing on her front porch on about 700 North Capitol Avenue, 724 to be exact. Looked up, saw Carl Fisher floating across the sky, and what do you think 15-year-old Jane Watt said to herself? You might know?
Shoot the balloon.
She did. She said, I want to marry that guy. And within a year, by the time she was 16, she was married to 36-year-old Carl Fisher, which surprised a lot of people, including a lady who had thought she was already engaged to Carl. They were married. We'll go into different, well, I'll skip a lot of things here. But as part of their honeymoon trip, he had built a yacht for her. At first he wasn't going to take her, he was going to go out with the boys, but she said, hey, you built this yacht for my honeymoon, I'm going to go with you and the boys. So they floated on the yacht. The last place they ended up was Miami, Florida. He noticed that between Miami and the ocean there was a spit of land that had not yet been developed, and he got in touch with the guy that owned it, made out some deals, and became the prime developer in Miami Beach, Florida. And that's when he got interested in the north-south highway that would end right where he wanted to sell you the land. Will Rogers said that he trained the mosquitoes in Florida not to bite you until they had bought land. So you had bought land. He and Jane Watt, or Fisher now, were married about 20 years. They had one child towards the end of their marriage that died at about the age of 3 months, is inside the mausoleum here. After that, the marriage kind of, what was left of it, went to pot. They had adopted a son. She kind of took solace in raising the son, while he took solace in the arms of his secretary and mistress, a lady named Ann Rossiter. And then promoting Miami Beach, he had a big illuminated sign in downtown Manhattan, reminding New Yorkers here in December that it was June in Miami, and he promoted it with a series of the bathing beauties of Miami Beach, and quote, the goddamnedest, tightest, and shortest bathing suits, and no stockings or swim shoes either. When they got divorced, Jane celebrated by going to Paris and buying $86,000 worth of jewelry. Carl apparently didn't allow her to buy jewelry. He continued to hang out with Ann Rossiter. Eventually, they got married and then got divorced. Well, I guess they didn't get married. She left him to get married to a minister, which I think is kind of strange, but that's what's happened. He had some financial setbacks, tried to develop a summer resort. In Miami, it's really hot in the summer, so you don't go down to Miami in the summer. He wanted people to go to Long Island, and he tried to develop something up there. Then the Depression hit. He had been worth probably at least $90 million back then. By the time he died, he only had about $50,000 some dollars in the bank, which is more than I got in the bank. But when you start out with 90 million, it's not that great. When he died in Miami, he died down in Miami. They had a big funeral service, $3,000 worth of flowers, lots of things going on. At first, they thought maybe he'd get buried in Miami. His wife at the time, who by then they were, I think, divorced again, his third wife, hung out in Miami. They didn't work out some arrangement. He had already filled up his mausoleum here, and they brought his ashes here in about 1941, and his ashes are inside the mausoleum on a table. So, I guess if you build yourself a mausoleum, save yourself some space. He is also the prime founder of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, which he developed to make cars a place to test cars so the cars could go faster, and then as they got faster and faster, you and I would buy more of them. When they're only going 15 miles an hour, I can get my horse to go that fast. Wants to get a little faster than that. Any questions about Carl? I guess while we're here, all four of the founders of the Motor Speedway are buried here at the track. At the cemetery. Another one, James Allison. Actually, Allison, Fisher, and Wheeler, third guy we'll talk about briefly, all had mansions that are now part of Cold Spring, on Cold Spring, part of Marion College. Allison, whose mansion still stands, actually everybody's but Fisher's does.